Vajradara Sumatimo Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sar Vajradara Sumatimo Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Oma Guru Vajradara Sumatimo Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Oma Guru Vajradara Sumatimo Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Oma Guru Vajradara Sumasi Sane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Oma Guru Vajradara Sumatimo Nishasane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Oma Guru Vajradara Sumatimo Nishasane Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Dagi Chetsun Lama Tuje Che Nyamda Dala Tuje Sikso So Gebe Shesan Dala Tendo So Oyon Sungge Nawa Tsedo So Seji Nyingne Sowa Debe Tse Dechen Korlo Visu Lekshone Yila Sambe Dedemal Me Lungi Drubra Jingi Lo Tsoni Sodan Digdun Shabe Tse Dunge Namke Yinso Lekshone Lapchen Tsoni Yonso Zopa Dan Cherani Dun Chamra Jingi Lo Chancho Pargi Ninsen Tukuntu Nyu Peme Siudru Lekshone Chancho Drube Gegen Kunshishi Tungen de la Drubra Chingelo Dagilo Na Chola Chokpa Dan Chamin Samjurang Emba Shiv Chodan Tumbe Deden Malupa Beme Lungi Drubra Chingelo Dorna Tengne Tsera Tamche Dan Techi Pardone Kaba Tamche Tu Rese Kyamne Lama Keleme Tukche Chingi Dala Siksu So Gongyab Drewe Nyamda Dachala Chetsun Lame Tuche Rab Gongne Kodan Sungi Nawa Dralme Tu Nyamsunyowe Kesan Tobrasho Kewa Kuntu Yanda Lama Dan Rame Cheki Pela Longchechi Sadan Lamgi Yente Dorje Changi Kopa Nyur Tobe Shoya Pakyuke Kudan Dagilu Pakyuke Sundan Dagi Nga Pakyuke Tukdan Dagi Tön yerme çıktı çingi lo Makyuke Kudan Dagi Makyuke sundan dagi nga Makyuke tukdan dagi Tön yerme çıktı çingi lo Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Shakyamuni Swaha Sashipuki Chushiameto Tramari Ravalingashe Nide Gyampadi Sange Shintu Mikte Ulvarki chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsuchi dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sange drupar shu sange chedan tsogi chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsuchi dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sange drupar shu sange chedan tsogi chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsuchi dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sange drupar shu.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Namo ya laye ke dan ridan jinke drubunda nami kenam dan drowakunge tranam che tsampa tamche ke tu dagi cheten to tamche ke tu dagi cheten to.
Good morning. Let's begin today with an image. Let's imagine that we're driving along a road, like a country road, where you can see maybe some crops growing on the sides, then a couple curves, maybe mountains in the background. Imagine it's a beautiful sunny day. It's not tiresome. As you're driving, you don't even need to pay too much attention to the road because everything is very clear. And so our attention goes to the landscape, where, what's happening, or where we're, the villages we pass without much attention. But at a certain point, it becomes dark. Not only does it become dark, but it starts raining. It becomes very foggy. And our headlights are not the best. And what happens is that we find ourselves on the same road, it's a narrow country road with many turns, full of fog, and there aren't even any white lines on the side of the road. I don't know if it's ever happened to you. If you've ever had to drive in the fog on a road without the white lines, it's really tiresome. It's happened to me. Because what's the greatest danger in a case like this? is that we would run off the road. And to stay on the road, one needs to drive very, very slowly and have a high level of attention. And even doing like this, the probability of running off the road is quite high. It happened to me once. It was raining so hard that you could hardly see anything, and most of the cars, they just stopped completely, and I kept going in my craziness. I remember this once between Milan and here, and most of the cars just pulled off the road and they were stopped. So what happens is the following. We need guidelines. Imagine that same road in the dark with fog, but with clearly painted white lines on the side of the road. The probability of running off the road is greatly lower. Those white lines are extremely important. What are these white lines? Using it as a kind of analogy, they're guidelines that we set for our own life. When it's a sunny day, meaning an inner sun, when things are going well, when we're happy, when there's clarity in our mind, etc. Those guidelines are not so necessary because we're on the road, we're following the right road. But there are days, I mean, we don't always have sunny days, or do we? Sometimes there are storms. Sometimes darkness comes, fog comes. It was the storm is when sadness arises, or the fog is a mental fogginess, and sometimes a storm is mixed with a little bit of fog. The rain is our sadness. We don't have clarity in our mind. There's also times there's a little bit, it's foggy. It can be foggy with the sun. It could be foggy with a big storm of anger, with or without rain. But it's in these cases that having these white lines is fundamental, because they protect us from running off the road, from getting off of our path. And I repeat, when it's sunny, those guidelines are not necessary. It's almost like they're there just to embellish the path, and we take it all very lightly. Those are the guidelines that we ourselves give. I remember once I went with Lama Ganchen, who had gone to bless the house of someone. I don't remember where we were. I think we were in Brazil, really. I don't remember. I remember that it was an apartment on a very high floor, maybe São Paulo. And Lama Ganchen went to see the house. He blessed the house, and at a certain point, he said something that really upset the person. He said, "Oh, you see that window? That window is very low. Be careful." And the person, "Are you saying that I'm going to throw myself from the window? Are you saying that I don't have enough attention, that I'm just going to fall out the window?" And he became very defensive. Instead, what Rinpoche was saying was simply, I see something that could be dangerous. I'm not saying that you're not careful, that you want to throw yourself from the window. You're saying that. I'm only saying something objective. But the point is, these so-called precepts, vows, commitments, these are guidelines that we set. So we see the dangers, and on a sunny day, those dangers, it seems like it doesn't exist. Like, for example, if I say, don't kill, take the vow to not kill. You take that vow deeply. So you take the vow to not kill other beings, and especially another human being. And one would say, that's an easy vow to take. Is there anyone here that sometimes wants to kill someone or has to kill someone? I imagine not. And so one would say, why should I take that vow? Because if it were to ever happen, and your lifetime with a lot of darkness, a big storm, lots of fog, where the conditions push you towards that type of reaction, those white lines need to be very clearly marked. So I take this commitment right away to avoid something that I don't want ever to do. There are certain vows that are important to avoid very serious things, but it's difficult for those things to come about. So one protects oneself in the eventuality. For example, what happens if we actually go to war? There's a possibility among all those possibilities, right? That at a certain point, there is a possibility that Italy at some point, or your own country, would get involved in war, and one would have to go to war. Like during the Second World War, there were people who spent years and years and years in prison because they refused to kill someone else. And when that happens, at that point, this vow becomes important. It's just an example. I'm not saying that the war is coming. Let's not go there. Even if in the reality of the world, looking long term, reality is cyclic, and there was never a reality where something just always stayed the same. There's cycles that get lived and relived. But what happens is, when we set an objective, when we give ourselves a direction, once the direction is set, once we've learned the means, the way to get there, we need to create protection, so that even in moments of darkness, moments of non-clarity, moments of storm, we stay on the road. And these are called vows, precepts, commitments that are guidelines to protect us along our path. So in mind training, the sixth point, these are the commitments of mind training, and the 7 are called the precepts of mind training. Generally speaking, the main difference between tamsik, which means commitment, and it's often directed towards what we should avoid. Don't do this, that, or the other. While when we talk about the concept of precept, it's mostly about something we should do, something to do. But let's not, it's not always true. But let's say that a commitment keeps me from refraining something. So in the case of danger, don't take this road, take this other one. This is samaya tamsik, commitment. And instead, the precepts it's advice that has to do with behavior in a positive way, like how to engage. So let's start from the samaya, from these vows, commitments. We have 18 commitments, which means if I want to practice the mind training path well, I put down these white lines, these guardrails, protective guardrails. And it's important to understand that vows, it's not something moral. I need to do this because I was told to do it. No, we do this to protect ourselves. So let's remember that vows are not here to, it's not moralistic. Don't do this because this was said that you shouldn't do it. No, these are experiences of centuries of those who have walked this path, who have seen these dangers, and then shares that with us and transmits this to us. It's like putting down a guardrail. Be careful here, or markers, so even on a sunny day, it doesn't matter. We don't see them so much. But on dark days, they're extremely important. So let's see what they are. Chitung Sumla Taktulab. The first one, actually in the translation it's number 3 actually. Don't be partial, always train in the 3 general points. What are the 3 general points? Let's look at the commentary of Geshe Rinpoche. That first point, don't go against the mind training that you promised to observe. So what does that first point mean? So we've taken a direction with our mind training practice to cultivate love, to transform adverse circumstances, to cultivate wisdom. We've set a direction. So that first commitment is to not cultivate an opposite direction, to not go against the general commitment that was taken. That's the first one. So I have a direction and I need to maintain that direction, like saying I'm going somewhere. I have a certain destination in mind, and I'm not going to take another road, regardless of the weather or the circumstances. I'm not going to take another road. This is my road. Because it's very probable that we follow a road as long as it's a nice road. But once we start seeing potholes, or it's too narrow, or it's dark, or filled with fog, at that point we can say, I'm going back. I'm going to take another road. Why? From my point of view, it's the first of the vows. The path is beautiful, but it's not easy. Surely there will be times when we're there and say, you know what? Let's just drop it. With this altruism, I'd be better off taking care of myself. Let's just leave all of this. I mean, there is this moment does come where we want to just drop it off, because facing our own ego, looking at ourselves in the eye, facing our own shadows, it's not easy. And there are moments where we want to just drop it all. And in those moments, instead, it's better to stop and let the storm pass, but don't change your road. So that's why the first vow is the first commitment. Come what may, I will not change my path, my road. Is that clear? That's the first commitment. Why is there this commitment? Because there is that imminent danger to want to change our path. Maybe in the moments of difficulties, we change our road, and when we get bored of the other road, we come back, and we're still at the same place, and we're going a little bit forward and then going backwards, and then a little bit forward and then going backwards. Instead, when we take a sure road, and it's important, we need to ask ourselves very seriously if we want to take this road or not. And once we choose fully to engage and take this road, come what may, we won't abandon, we won't leave that road, that direction. That's the first commitment. The second one is quite, it's almost fun. It says, don't be reckless in your practice. Tochuk in Tibetan. Tochuk Rangshorshak. Tochuk means things that don't have much meaning, that are disconnected from reality. Just imagine that I'm following a road, and at a certain point, I see that the road goes on, and walking. I've done this a couple of times. I'm walking, and then there's the road, the path, and in mountain, they go. Either they go straight or they go round and round. They turn around. But sometimes one just wants to go straight. I've done it a couple of times. Either you end up, walking through all sorts of shrubbery or rocks, or so the second one says, don't be so adventurous. Remember the length of your own legs, your own abilities. Don't do things that go beyond your possibilities. Because if I try to just it's better to follow the gradual path instead of trying to climb a cliff. You don't try to be Superman or Wonder Woman. Don't try to do those. One example that's given in the commentary it's a commentary that was taught by Lama Tsongkhapa but written by Horten Nankapel, a disciple of Lama Tsongkhapa, who transcribed these teachings on the 7-point mind training given by Lama Tsongkhapa. So it was transcribed by him. The text is called, it's mind training like rays of the sun. And I received these teachings. I had the great fortune to receive these teachings in the past. In this text, says, for example, don't think that because you practice mind training, that you have total control over everything, and that you can go in the middle of people with contagious sicknesses because you practice mind training. It's like saying, it's not because I am practicing mind training that I don't risk the dangers of sickness or war. In other words, don't put yourself into situations that put you at high risk because I need to save the world. The opportunity that I have now to gradually, it's the mid and long term is more important than the immediate future. So I don't put myself in the situations of high danger like war because I need to be altruistic and follow mind training. I put myself in the game, but keeping a minimum amount of security, safety, and I don't enter that attitude because I practice mind training, nothing will happen to me. I can do anything. So don't be adventurous, reckless. There are those who know how to climb a cliff instead of following the gradual path. Those who are highly trained. But if we look at ourselves with attention, we know and we can see our own limits. There are those who have this ability to go in the middle of war and talk to people and try to change people's lives. There are people like that. Think of Saint Francis. But I'm not Saint Francis. I don't know about you. And one needs to respect one's own limits because it's more important to walk long term than to experience something massive and then fall to pieces. So the second one is the first vow. We keep that road always. But if you see that there's a point that's dangerous, you do it with attention, caution. Take the longer route. But don't put yourself into situations of too much danger. Are you following? The third general point, in Tibetan it says, let me just take the dictionary here to see this general point. This doesn't convince me. Okay. Don't be partial. What does that mean? This means don't practice in one context like this and in another context like that. So towards my friends, I practice Lojong, and at work, I don't. This is a path that no matter where I am, with whom I am, or regardless of the condition, I follow this path. So don't be partial, be impartial, regardless of your situation. So in this context, I practice gratitude, respect, and altruism, and in that other context, I don't. No. Wherever I find myself, I follow this path. Why does this commitment exist? Because the danger is imminent. How probable is it to want to practice in one context and not in another? Very probable. How probable is it that in moments of difficulties we say, I can't do it, and we just abandon it? That's possible too. So the second one, that really depends on each one of us, on how adventurous we want to be, how reckless we want to be. But among these first three, the third, in my opinion, is the one that shows the greatest probability of it happening. So in easier situations, I practice. In more difficult ones, I don't. Instead, regardless of the context, regardless of the person that we're with, we practice. Because what happens when we're in front of someone who has a behavior that, according to me, is extremely wrong, that I condemn deeply, there we really need to practice Lojong and cultivate love, compassion, see the other with equality. It's much easier to say, I'm going to practice Lojong, compassion, with those who, according to my view, are victims. But when I have in front of me, when I have in front of me the lamb and the lion, we should not be partial. We need to practice Lojong in the same way, cultivating compassion to both in the same way. As we said in other contexts, it doesn't mean that I see an act of violence and I say, yes, that act of violence is justified because poor guy. No, but I can have aversion towards the action, towards the feelings that are behind that action. And I can do everything I can to stop something that I think is hurting both people, but without hate, without anger. I need to try to cultivate and maintain a state of equality and respect and love, compassion in the same way towards one and also towards the other. We're not talking about a macro level like a war. We're talking about our daily life when there's someone who fights with someone else. The small happenings of everyday life. Don't be partial. That danger exists, doesn't it? And for this reason, that's why the commitment exists, so that we set down clearly our white lines on the road. Let's go on. Transform your attitude. So, number 3, don't be partial, and it continues. Always train in these 3 points. Don't go against the mind train. Don't be reckless, and don't be partial. These are the 3 general points. The 4th vow, Dumpa Gyurla Ransor Shak. Transform your attitude but maintain your natural behavior. Don't try to show to the world around you that you are practicing mind training. Don't dress in a certain way or use certain terminology. Show to the world outside a change in behavior to show that you're different. Keep your behavior, your external manifestation, as your social cultural context shows. Practice mind training from within, from inside out. Obviously, those inner changes will bring external changes, but they're natural consequences. We don't go looking to show the world that we are Lojong practices, and even our intimate family and co-workers. our husband, our wife, our children, our co-workers. This danger exists, doesn't it? And that's why there's the vow, the commitment. What's the danger that lies behind this? Once I want to show the world around me that I am practicing Lojong, this the mental mind training, but I say it in Tibetan because it has. I'm practicing Lojong. Well, Lojong, what's Lojong? Oh, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. So what happens with that? At that point, practicing Lojong becomes a way to nourish one's own ego, to nourish an idealized image of myself. I'm better than you because I practice Lojong. And at this point, I'm destroying it. So I maintain an external conduct, the way I speak, the way I dress, the way I interact. I don't specifically try to show to the world something that's happening within. It's natural, it's obvious that by making an inner change, there will be external changes. That's inevitable, and that's fine. But that needs to be a natural consequence, and not something that one does because one wants to show off, show something else. And that's why I remember some time ago, together with Lama Ganchen, we were talking about putting together a study program in Buddhism, and I created a syllabus, what we should teach. It's like a formation course. But then some questions came out, such as, rightly so, as long as these teachings, for these teachings, so that this lineage can last, can continue in time, the more people who know and can share, the better it is. Even my grandfather once, he's a man, he's a businessman. He made his created his factory. I mean, he also needed to train people, and so talking about it, the real problem, I said, is that it's easy to transmit knowledge, the course, teaching point by point. But what scares me, and one of the reasons why I've never put together this project, then I generalized. I said, then one can become, I am the teacher, and one nourishes one's ego for having studied certain things and having a certain role. And that's very dangerous. There's point number 9 that says avoid poisonous food. And then another says don't transform gods into demons, is number 17, which means don't transform something that is there to eliminate your selfishness with something that actually cultivates it. So then we started thinking, well, what kind of name would we give to the people who have concluded these teachings? How should people dress? And you saw that beautiful idea, that might even stimulate people to study in a certain way. But I grew up in a context where I saw many times this danger come to fruition. And what I said to my grandfather in this case, it's transmitting information is easy, but one needs to also have experience and have that desire to be at the service of others, is what Lama Ganshin really transmitted to me, and I try to be consistent with this. So what happens when we say transform your attitude but maintain your natural behavior? It's about, well, this path happens, is walked within, not outside. It's a path we walk inside. And also, there's another Lamrim text that says, I don't remember exactly which one, there are great meditators who go live in a cave, maybe in the mountains, and they've been able to abandon their attachment to material things. They live with the bare necessities. They don't have attachment to the body, to the pleasures of the body. They eat what is available without any problem. But when they come down to the village after their time in retreat, they're the great meditators. There's an attachment to the image, how other people see them, and this is a real danger, because when I start showing something, when I start showing what I want other people to see, I change my behavior to nourish an idealized image of how I want other people to see me. At that point, what have I done? I've taken a road that takes me to a complete opposite place. It seems like I'm taking the right road, and instead I've done a complete turnabout because I'm kind. I have this very altruistic attitude. I try to meditate well, but actually, what do I want to be? I want to be the great practitioner. I want to nourish my ego with that, and I am just tricking myself. I think that's quite clear, isn't it? I'm ruining myself. And for this reason, one of the first things is don't change your external way of being. When when in Rome, do as Romans. You don't need to go to Rome and tell them you're Tibetan. What happens? It's important to respect, to maintain a conduct where we respect where we are, the culture of where we are, but mostly the essential point here is to not try to make an external change to show something that's inside. But I repeat, naturally, by making inner changes, our priorities will change. Naturally, our way of interacting will change, and there will be external changes. But we let them happen naturally, spontaneously, as a consequence of an inner change, and not something done specifically to show an inner change. Maybe we try to show an inner change that hasn't even happened yet, it doesn't even exist. Are you following? For example, this comes out in the most subtle of ways. Let me just give you a very simple example. I get into a context where there are certain rules of conduct, even unspoken rules of conduct, to be, how can I say, to be in the system. So during teachings, before teachings, people do prostrations. And I want to show how well I do them. I want other people, I want to do them. Maybe I even don't know how to do them well, but I want to do them because I don't want people to think I'm weird or that I'm out of place. And that's normal that we have this idealized image of how we want other people to see us in that context. So if I'm in the Gompa, so when I'm in the Gompa, I look for an image that I want to nourish, but when I'm at home, it's yet another image, and at work, it's another. And this we should avoid as well. To have an external behavior that tries to nourish this idealized image, and even more so, it's more important in the spiritual, religious area. That's a true imminent danger, and that's why we're careful about this and we take this vow. And then every once in a while one slips, that's normal, but then one gets back up. I don't know it's ever happened that when you're driving that you go off the road a little bit. It can happen, but it's important to maintain the right direction. So it says, transform your attitude, your inner attitude, but maintain your natural behavior, your external behavior. Don't try, I repeat it one more time, don't make external changes to show something that is inside, whether it's there or not. Okay, the fifth point. Let me just look at the commentary. The next two are among my favorite ones that go together. They say, don't speak of others' incomplete qualities. In other words, don't criticize others. Don't talk about other people's defects. Don't criticize others. Normally, when we criticize someone else, when we talk about something that has to do with someone else, what are the main attitudes? Why does one do it? What is one nourishing? First of all, if the other one is worse off, that means I'm better off. So by highlighting a weakness of someone else, that's my reference point to show that I am better off. It's purely self-centered. In another case, I highlight something that is not right in someone else to try to link myself to someone, a third person. So I look for a common enemy to make a friend. Is that clear? I don't know. I meet someone and I criticize the government. Not because I'm really interested in talking about politics, because I'm trying a common ground of aversion to create a union, a link between us. Is that clear? So they're actions that nourish our own selfishness, self-centeredness. So don't criticize others. Don't talk about the missing qualities, the incomplete qualities of others. Let me just give you a particular example. I ask someone to cook. That person, or let's say there's someone who offers a kind of service, cooking. So that person comes, it cooks for me. Or a more practical example, I go eat in a restaurant. Someone comes, oh, how did it go? I'm looking for someone to cook for me. How did it go in that restaurant? And let's say that my experience was terrible, But I have this vow to not criticize. What do I do? I talk about my experience. My experience is I didn't eat well. Because when we talk about criticizing, it's more about, okay, I go to eat somewhere, I don't eat well, and then I say, oh, this place is terrible, one eats so badly. It's very different than answering a specific question where I share my own experience. My experience was an experience where it didn't go well and I wouldn't repeat it. It's different if saying, oh, that place is horrible, that person is like this or like that, and I start pointing my finger at all the defects. Can you see the difference? So I can talk about my own perception, my own experience, but I do it in a specific context and not freely how it normally happens. Okay? So don't speak of others' incomplete qualities. Yenlak in Tibetan means some branches, like of a tree, so aspects. And Nyampa means degenerated. So don't talk about the degenerated qualities of others. It was Yanlak Nyampa Jeming Cha. And then maybe someone would say, well, what do I talk about? Better to stay quiet. And we do only good for society. Once we were in Tibet on a group trip, and there were people who had chosen during this group trip to take the vow of silence, and it was hilarious because they were there with a kind of board in front of them. They were all seated at a table. The people, they were people. There was some person who took a vow of silence and then sat down at a table with people who were having a very animated conversation, and then this person was very interested in the conversation, and he couldn't interact and would actually write down what he wanted to say with his little chalkboard. So, don't talk about the incomplete qualities of others, and we can add then, that means also texting. Don't write, don't mention the incomplete qualities of others. And this is an important exercise because complaining is an international sport. We have this habit when we go somewhere, when we meet someone, one of the things we do, we look for things that aren't going well, that are not right. I've seen people say, "Oh, that person is so nice." Yes, but it's true that this person is nice, but have you noticed this or that? And keeping this vow, we redirect ourselves on the road that Lama Ganchen walked, because once Lama Ganchen was asked, how is it that you have so many friends? And he answered, I have so many friends. And it's true, it was true, just an infinite number of friends, because I relate to their qualities and not their defects. So it's by not criticizing others, we connect to their qualities more and more. But it comes first from our speech, and don't talk about it, don't write about it, because this is an attitude that really nourishes our self-centeredness and aversion. Number 6, Shenchuk Kayang Misammo. The translation is, how can I say, is adapted. A better translation that is a little adapted would be mind your own business, because literally it says don't concern yourself with others' business. But Shenchuk, Shen means others, Chok means other facts, and then Kayang means to think. It means don't think about the business of others. Just mind your own business, instead of saying, "Oh, did you see this? Have you heard this?" I mean, how much space is taken up with other people's life, even lives of those who don't really exist. Have you ever concerned yourself with the lives of people who don't actually exist by following TV shows or movies? This person cheated on that person, and I think he's going to do this, that, and the other, but they don't even exist. And it just exhausts your life like this. Has it ever happened that you felt aversion towards a character in a movie? Just very, very few times it has happened to me, and I realized, what am I doing? What am I doing? One thing is of once in a while. Another thing is that it takes up an important part of your life. Generally speaking, when we don't care about other people's business, what direction do we take? Do we rejoice? Do we compare? Do we criticize? Do we learn? Do we observe? When we actually are concerning ourselves with other people's business, where does the mind go? It's that game of friend and enemy, attraction, aversion. It's very hard. It's very seldom do I hear conversations where people are talking about other people and they say, "Oh, how wonderful. Do you see how well that person is? That person has been able to overcome that problem. I'm so happy." This is fine. This is a way to cultivate feelings, virtuous feelings, but normally it's not like that when we concern ourselves with other people's business. So, not minding your own business doesn't mean not seeing others or not taking care of others. One thing is really being interested in someone else. Something else is just concerning yourself with their business. I don't know if the difference is clear. I mean, really, I want you to be happy. Really, I want you to be able to overcome your conflicts, your sicknesses, that you can be well. And where I can help you, I'll do everything I can. And if I need to understand the situation better to interact in a better way, I'll do it. But what color underwear you wear, it doesn't, I don't care. What you did, what you didn't do, what you're doing, that doesn't add anything. And what doesn't add anything to helping me interact in a healthy way, that's just unimportant for me. And out of respect for others too. Is that clear? If the person has a conflict, a particular situation, and we have the ability to interact with that person, it's important to listen, to know, understand, to then interact in a way with more awareness. So it's fine then to know others, but without just just involving ourselves in others' business. Because when we do that, we also judge. How is it that person? How could that person do that? We get into this mind of judgment, and very often we concern ourselves with others' business, not because we really care for others, but it's a way to nourish our own ego, where we can compare ourselves to others and we bring ourselves up. So I criticize someone to show that I'm better. I look for negativities to feel better about myself. So just these two commitments, these two vows could do so much. But I mean, the danger is real. There's a danger of criticizing others, isn't there? Yes. And if we criticize others, what's the problem? We're nourishing our own ego and we create unhealthy dynamics when we concern ourselves with other people's business and lives, not in the good way, in wanting to understand others, to help them really, but when we're there judging, we're nourishing our own ego more and more, and that feeling of attraction and aversion, that separation between friends and enemies. And that is absolutely not good. It's not good for us. Let's remember that these 2 points are habits, and unfortunately, most of them, we grew up in a context where this was normal. We're used to sit down at the table and to listen about the lives of others. Sometimes the life of others becomes even public domain. When actor X or actress Y did this, that, and the other, what does it have to do with me? I don't need to know. Right? Okay. So, okay, we could go on, but there are 18 and we're on number 6. But it's clear, isn't it? It's clear enough, isn't it? Okay, number 7. Where are we now? Nyomong Nyomong Ganshin no la che. No, Jang. Nyomong Ganshe Nang La Chang. Here it gets a little bit more difficult. Train to counter whichever disturbing emotion is greatest. Nyomong Kanshin Nang La Chang. Jang means to train, to counter. So whichever disturbing emotion is the greatest. Nyongmong is mental defilement. So what's the definition of mental defilement? Nyongmong. Sem ratu mashila. A mental defilement is that which brings the mind to a strong state of non-peacefulness. When it's manifest, it takes the mind to a state of strong unpeacefulness. We have many mental defilements. We have jealousy, anxiety, fear, and arrogance, anger, dissatisfaction, unlimited desire, etc. We need to face the one, the one that is the strongest. We work on that one first. So, is it anger? Is it arrogance? Is it miserliness? Is it dissatisfaction? Is it resentment? What is it that really takes away my peace, that manifests itself more than the others? The strongest is the first one that I need to face. Otherwise, the tendency is the strongest one, I just set it aside for some time later, but in the meantime, it just grows stronger and stronger. So we look at ourselves in the eye, and we put ourselves in the game, and we look at ourselves and we say, I have many mental defilements, but I'm going to work on the one that is the strongest. Train to counter whichever disturbing emotion is greatest. This means that we keep an attitude of self-awareness. And it's also clear that we're not taking ourselves for a ride. Number 10, for example, we're going to get there. It's very connected to just don't maintain misplaced loyalty. Don't maintain misplaced loyalty goes together also with train to counter whichever disturbing emotion is greatest, because what happens sometimes is I see that I have a habit, a conditioning, a mental defilement that is harmful to me, but I don't want to face it. And so I take a whole nother job. And because I'm working on something else, then that justifies the fact that I've left this aside. It's like saying, oh, I have a company, somebody's stealing. I see that someone is stealing, but that person's a friend. It's been working there for many years. I don't want to, because he actually does a very important job, and I don't want to face that problem. And so what do? I justify, I justify the person's good work, and I let him stay stealing, but then that person keeps stealing more and more, and then the whole company comes down. So when there's an important program, it needs to be faced, even if it's difficult or tiresome, because misplaced loyalty is the loyalty to our unhealthy condition, our unhealthy habits. We'll come back to that. So train to counter whatever disturbing emotion is greatest, this negative habit. When we see problems, we need to face them and not set them aside with this attitude, oh, because I'm working on another front, I can set that one aside. Not because this other one is a greater priority, it's because I don't want to face the other. Number 8, Trebu Rewar Tamche Pang, which is give up every hope of reward. Why do I train my mind? Why do I train in the development of love and wisdom? Not because I want something in return, and And not even because I want to be at peace with myself or even get out of samsara myself because I can't manage anymore. I can't handle it anymore. No, that's a means, not an end. So abandon any expectation for reward. Give up every hope of reward. I don't I don't do this because I want to resolve problems in my life. I don't practice mind training because I want to be an important practitioner, because I want to obtain something. Why do I practice mind training? Because I want to be at the service of others. Because really, I'm the happiness and suffering of every being is important to me, and I really want to be at the service of the Dharma and other beings in the best way possible, in the deepest way possible. But the danger of wanting something in return is imminent, isn't it? Is strongly present. Oh, look here. Look at how much I work, and what happens to me, or what do I get? I'm waiting for something in return. With everything I do, and then this happens to me. What does that have to do with anything? I mean, your karma is your karma. The negative karmic forks that you have generated in the past, that's up to you. It's not that because now you're being a good person that you can change the past. It's like someone who has smoked for 50 years, stops smoking, and then complains that they have some kind of lung problem. Now that I've stopped smoking, yeah, but the fact is that you stop smoking now, that doesn't take away the damage that you did in the past 50 years, right? So we should have no expectation to get something in exchange. Give up every hope of reward. Naturally, we do it, and we really need to protect ourselves, because the more I expect something in exchange, then the stronger my disappointment will be, and more easily will I go off the path. The more I expect something, the more polluted my path is, and the stronger my selfishness grows, and that's really what I want to avoid completely. When I love someone, that person gives me the opportunity to enter in contact with the most beautiful part of me. So I don't expect you to recognize what I'm doing or to tell me how good I've been. I don't expect a smile, and I don't expect you to help me, even though I have helped you. If you give me something, if you help me, if you're kind with me, I have gratitude towards your kindness, but I don't have that expectation. I give to you because because you're important to me, and as soon as I allow this to happen, then you become a tool that allows me to come into contact to a very important part of myself, and that's already enough, and beyond anything I could ever hope for. Is that clear? The danger is real, isn't it? Yes. And that's why there's the commitment. It's a little bit like saying, okay, so we're not just putting down white lines on the road, we're also putting up guardrails and also signs, be careful here, be careful there, to not fall into the trap of our own conditioning. It happens, but then the more careful we are, the easier it is, and then we always get back on the road. So give up every hope of reward. Don't expect to get anything back from our altruism, especially from this practice of mind training. We do it truly, sincerely, to be at the service of every being. Tukche gi sepang.
Lojong dretun duchir gompa tabu chöge gi tokpa drebatans dak chenzin kulongi leba tukchen gi set tabu pans evita il cibo
Avoid poisonous food.
evita il cibo
Avoid poisonous food.
cos'è il cibo?
What is food in this context? It's something that should nourish us.
Ma se io prendo un cibo
But if I take wonderful, healthy food and I put a little bit of arsenic in it,
cosa succede?
what would happen?
Mi fa tanto male.
It would be very, very harmful. I probably die. I've never tried.
Se metto il veleno
If I put in poison,
mi distrugge quel cibo.
it destroys that food. So something that should have
Del male.
been
In questo caso che cos'è che ci nutre?
beneficial becomes extremely harmful. And along our path, what nourishes us? Our practice, our meditation,
Pratiche della generosità.
practices of generosity, interacting with others in a virtuous way.
Tutto questo è quello che nutre il
This
nostro
all
sentiero.
nourishes our path.
Se io vado a prendere una pratica
If
spirituale,
I go and take a spiritual practice, meditation,
consapevole di generosità,
or I practice generosity with awareness, or practice karma yoga, or sacred art, or anything done within the context of a spiritual path, and I just add a drop of arsenic,
vuol dire io
which
lo vado a
means I
impregnare
pollute
con una
it
motivazione
with
egoistica,
a selfish motivation, and I leave that situation as a means to nourish my own ego.
io sto
I am
avvelenando
poisoning
qualcosa che dovrebbe
something
nutrirmi.
that should nourish me.
Un esempio,
Let me give you an example.
questo maestro
This master
Tibet che si
who
chiamava Geshe Ben
who lived in Tibet, whose name was Geshe Geshe Ben Kungel. Many stories about him. It was very direct. Once Geshe Ben Kungel was doing a solitary retreat in a kind of mountain cave, a mountain hut, remote. And his master he was very important, recognized master, and asked one of his lay disciples, who was quite wealthy, to sponsor Ben Kungel during his retreat, which meant going to him every couple months, every 3 months, every 6 months, bringing him food and resources. And one day he was preparing himself for his morning practice. It was the day that his benefactor was supposed to come. And that day he cleaned his mountain hut a little bit more. He always made offerings on his altar, but that day he added some flowers. He made more beautiful offerings so that he could receive his benefactor, his sponsor. After he finished all the offerings, he sat down to meditate. He sees the offerings and he asks himself, who did I make those offerings for? Actually, I made those offerings to nourish my own ego, so that the benefactor would see what a good practitioner I am. So it's poisonous food. At that point, he took from the ground a bit of dirt, because it was a cave. It wasn't a house. And then he threw the dirt on the offerings, and he dirtied everything, mud and dirt. And he sat down with a grumpy face. Not the whole time. Only when the benefactor was arriving, he became he kind of hunched over. He didn't really answer him. He answered, he grumbled, and then the benefactor said, "I brought you offerings," and he answered rudely. And then this benefactor went to the master, he was upset, and he said, well, what's he doing? I mean, it was with all the effort that I put in, to bring him offerings. His offerings were dirty. He was rude to me. He not even just a tinge of kindness. And then the master said, explain to me better. The offerings were dirty with mud, and he didn't even look at you in the face. At that point, the master put his hands together, and he said, "Kyapsuchi," which means I take refuge. And he said he made the best of offerings that he could have ever made, and he welcomed you in the best way that he could have, because he did all of this going beyond his ego. So he did something that didn't nourish his ego, but went against it and avoided poisonous food. This is an example of abandoning poisonous food, and we need to be careful, because there's a double poisonous food where I see that I'm making offerings to nourish my offering, and I throw the mud, and then I say, oh, look at what a good practitioner I am. Look at what a good practitioner I am, that you can see that I've gone beyond my own ego, and in that case I've eaten 2 portions of poisonous food. So it's really important in this case to be careful. The spiritual practices that we do, they shouldn't be done to nourish our own egos. Let me give you another example. Geshe Rinpoche, one of my masters, who is still living in the south of India, when I lived there, His Holiness the Dalai Lama would come and give teachings. There would be 8,000 people, 8,000 monks all there to receive teachings, and they would receive all the most important lamas and abbots. They would all be there. And my master, for a personal choice, he never accepted to have an important role. Once they wanted to make him an abbot, and he literally escaped from the monastery. That morning he just wasn't there, and he left a letter, which said, until you don't remove my name from the list of candidates for the abbot, I won't come back. But he was one of the most important masters. All the lamas would go to him. He was someone very important. And the Dalai Lama would always call him specifically so that he would sit nearby him. And he never accepted that. He would sit outside. There's too many people. They didn't all fit inside. And he would sit with the lay people in the shade near a speaker, so he could hear the teachings. And I asked him again, like, why do you sit outside? I had a very close relationship with him. I said, why do you sit outside? It's hotter. The tea comes to you cold. Imagine serving tea to 8,000 people. Then those in the back, when it gets there, you're not able to see the Dalai Lama close up. He's asking for you to sit close by. Why are you doing like this? And he answered, I know my own weaknesses. I'm here to listen to the teachings and not to nourish my own ego. The higher up you are, the more it hurts when you fall down. Leave me where I know I'm comfortable. Where I sit, that can poison our practice. This problem is much smaller, but in many other contexts, there's a kind of hierarchy of where people sit. Oh, that's my place, closer, farther. And Lama Genshin once said, you want to see how selfishness works? You sit down in one chair, and it becomes my chair. So what happens here, we avoid, when we're going to listen to a teaching, for example, don't pollute that sacred act with selfishness, so that it nourishes our own selfishness. When we go on retreat, when we do a practice, when we do any kind of virtuous action that is part of our path, that has at its basis to contrast our selfishness, we need to make sure that it doesn't nourish our selfishness, our self-centeredness, and where we see that there's the risk of poisoning it, we need to avoid it. If we sit in a certain position, because if we recognize, if I see that sitting in a specific place nourishes this image of myself, I don't sit there. Or I have this habit of sitting the closest to the master, and I realize that I'm polluting that sacred act. And so what do? I act differently. I abandon that poisonous act. I do differently. So when I realize that I have poisoned the food, I don't eat it. As Ben Kungel did, as my master, when he would go to teachings, would do, he would see there was this comparing himself to others. Because when I'm there, he said, then I'm more worried about, the hierarchy of where people are seated, or those who are thinking about where I'm seated and asking themselves why I'm seated there, and then I'm not following the teachings. My mind is filled with these other thoughts. When we see that the food is poisonous, that food should not be eaten. Is that clear? We need to cook up something else. And if that one's poisoned, then we skip a meal. Maybe we're a little bit hungry sometimes. So avoid poisonous food. That was number 9. Number 10. Don't maintain misplaced loyalty. So misplaced loyalty is a mental defilement to which we are loyal, a bad habit to which we are loyal. Geshe Rinpoche talks about cultivating over time resentment towards an enemy, or mental defilements of behavior that we know are not good, but somehow, somewhere we like them. And so we don't face them, we don't abandon them because we like them. The danger is real, isn't it? It's imminent. Because there are habits. I don't know, just an example, any kind of example. It took me some time to accept that I couldn't eat certain things like mozzarella. It took me time. Even when I had understood it at the beginning, I'd say, no, really, no, not possible. One sees that that thing is bad for you, but when that poison has a good taste, then better to eat it and suffer. This is a misplaced loyalty, maintaining misplaced loyalty, because I shouldn't be loyal to my bad habits and to my mental defilements. If we have a habit and we don't realize it, that's something else. But where we see that there's an unhealthy dynamic and we see it, it's not said that that we're able to eliminate it right away, but at least we should oppose it and not try to nourish it and not cultivate this misplaced loyalty. Is that clear? So don't maintain misplaced loyalty. That's clear, isn't it? Sometimes what we do is to keep this misplaced loyalty, we justify it by doing something else somewhere else. Like, it's true that I spit in the face of this person, but I help this other person. One thing doesn't have anything to do with the other. And it's not because I'm good at something that my negative conditioning in something else is counter-opposed. It's not a kind of scale that weighs the average. No. It's not like the supermarket points you get at the supermarket where you win points and you lose points. So I did something positive here, all this positive karma, I have lots of points. And then, oh, I did that bad thing, but that to compensate from those negative things. I have these positive actions, and more than points, it's like land where I plant seeds. And it's not because I've planted medicinal seeds of medicinal plants that the seeds of poisonous plants are not going to grow. Actually, the poisonous seeds, when they transform into plants, they can really harm me. So a positive act doesn't counteract a negative one. This is one way that one can maintain his misplaced loyalty, because it's hard to face our bad habits. Absolutely. I'll give you a personal example. When I used to study in India, the study was made up of 3 exams. There was a debate exam, memorization, and the written exam. There were 70 of us about in my class, and in debate, I would be among the first 5, and in the memorization, I would be among the last 4. But I would say, well, the one that counts for moving up to the next year is the debate exam, and I would justify saying, well, I don't want to be a parrot. In the West, we're not very good at memorizing. Why was I not good at memorizing? Because I didn't like it. Once there was a month and a half before the memorization exam. I wasn't good at it because I didn't put effort into it, and so one day, one of the masters, who was actually the one to give the memorization test, and he said, you know that in a month and a half there's the test, there's the memorization test, and there's a minimum of 100 pages a year. You know that, right? And I said, yes. How much have you memorized so far? I said, 24 pages. He said, okay. And he said only one thing to me that touched me deeply. He said, remember that if you don't put effort into that which is difficult for you, where are you going to put this effort? So what happens? I liked listening to teachings, and I'd go to teachings that weren't even of my class, so they were for higher classes. So or even to past years, I would listen to the same teaching several times. I would read a lot, and debate sessions ended at 9, but sometimes I would stay until 11:30 at night to debate for 2 reasons. Because I liked it a lot, and also because at 10:30 was the time that one should have spent time reinforcing what one had memorized that day, so I could avoid doing that. But I would say, oh, I put so much effort into my studies. Memorization is not that important, but once I heard that, I understood, and that year, that exam I brought 124 pages because I dedicated morning, noon, and night to memorization. It's the only time that happened, but I was able to do that. And I was able in 1 month to do what I should have done in an entire year. Sometimes there are things that really take us outside our comfort zone. And instead of getting out of our comfort zone, what do? We justify that with something else. So I know that I have this bad habit. I know that that's not good for me. But look, I do this other thing. This is a way to trick ourselves. And that bad habit, over time, it becomes deeper. The opportunities I had to memorize, I've lost those opportunities because to memorize well, you need mental space that is completely free from other worries. And those years are gone for me. Or one stops doing anything because once we maintain this misplaced loyalty of bad habits, they increase, and sooner or later we need to face them, or they bring us down, and we're hurting only ourselves. So do not maintain a misplaced loyalty. I think it's very clear. Okay. This doesn't mean eliminating that bad habit immediately, but at least face it seriously and not pretend with ourselves. The next one. Shenan. Let me just look at the dictionary a moment. It's not there. Don't make sarcastic remarks. The definition here is don't make comments that highlight others' defects or oppose others that don't that highlights some aspects that are harmful. So sarcastic remarks, do they highlight defects or qualities? But someone might say, but they're funny. They're part of our culture. Let's laugh a little. What's wrong with it? On one side, nothing really. But when someone makes a sarcastic comment towards us sincerely, is it good for us? Is it bad? Are we indifferent? Normally, maybe we laugh, but it's not good. When we make a sarcastic comment about someone, we're basing ourselves on a process of comparison and highlighting differences. When we see someone else as being different, someone else is different exclusively in comparison to someone else. So if we're the center of the universe, or maybe we have a small group and that person is different from our small group or different from me, and this is usually one of the object of comments. One can say, oh, well, that person can't get upset because the person's not here. But when I make a sarcastic comment, what are the feelings at the basis that I'm nourishing? Respect, gratitude, altruism, love, awareness, acceptance? Or am I nourishing arrogance, aversion, distance, lack of respect, lack of consideration, indifference? What am I nourishing? Just think about it seriously. Because the point here is it's evil to make sarcastic comments. As I said at the beginning, they're not based on a moral basis, on what we can do and can't do, should do, shouldn't do. They're based on asking ourselves how this behavior transforms us. So the more sarcastic comments I make, the greater the habit it becomes, and the more comments I'll make. I mean, if you think it's beneficial, do it. But I think that normally when sarcastic comments are made, the characteristics that are negative characteristics are cultivated, right? So they should be avoided. Let's avoid them. Don't lie in ambush. Don't lie in ambush is when one is connected directly to resentment and a feeling of paying someone back in a negative way. When we've lived a negative, a suffering experience, and we wait for that ideal moment to get them back. So wait for that moment when maybe I make sure that I'm in front of someone else with that person to highlight your negativities, or wait for that weakness of yours to come out so I can highlight it. Let's not wait for that moment to harm someone. So we should abandon any form of vendetta, and not stay with that feeling of resentment because you did this and that happened and you did that. That only nourishes anger, aversion, hatred, arrogance. And so do not lie in ambush. And it's not even about hitting someone or striking the blow. It's just about waiting. So it's like saying, after everything you've done for me, you just wait. I'll show you. There's that the danger of falling in this trap is real, isn't it? It's imminent. Even in small things. For example, at home within a family, one needs something, has this need, but this other person in that moment is focused on himself and is not there to be helpful. And maybe one is upset. I mean, this can happen. So it's a moment where I need support, attention, help, a kind word, something practical. I ask for help, or I show my need for help, and I don't get the help that I wanted, and I feel upset about it. But then there's something that works inside, and I think, oh, well, wait until you need help. That can happen, right? And then when we see that the other person is in need, a kind of joy comes out. Oh, now you'll see what it's like to be in need and not get help. Don't do this. It is harmful. It's only harmful to ourselves. Is that clear? So don't lie in ambush. What's the attitude, what's the image that comes up of someone lying in ambush, just hidden in a corner, waiting for that moment where the other one is unaware, waiting for that moment to strike, to hit. So don't be there waiting to harm someone, to hit someone, to get someone. Number 13. It's the next point after lying in ambush. Don't strike at the vital points, at their weaknesses. Don't try to find weaknesses in others where you can strike them. This reminds me of a time where many years ago, I had a kind of argument with someone, a discussion. At a certain point, the person leaves this object of argument and says things to me that hurt me, really looking for weaknesses. And after, when things calmed down, I said, you know, what upset me was that you went specifically to look for weaknesses to harm me that had nothing to do with what we were talking about. And the answer was, we were fighting. This is how you fight. I said, okay, thanks for having taught me this. And for me, we were discussing one thing. So that one thing, what does this other thing become? Instead, when the person is an object of aversion, one looks for other things that have nothing to do with that topic of conversation, like the politicians do today. If I need to vote for someone, I need to make sure that that person has a direction that I share, that has values, that has a direction that I share, has a good ability to manage his let's call it work. What he did in the past, what he did in his private life or her private life. Sincerely speaking, I don't understand what one thing has to do with another often, but what I see is that very often when there's a moment of conflict between two parties, the point is not about resolving the object of discussion, but it's about just hitting each other. And this happens also in the private sphere arena. When there's a conflict with someone, one tries to one looks for the weaknesses of the other and to strike instead of resolving the point at hand. And this should be completely avoided. Don't strike at the vital points. Don't look for others' weaknesses. We face conflicts. Where there are conflicts, we face them. Sometimes if that requires a little bit of even force, then we use that if we know how. But we don't look for weaknesses, and we certainly don't strike at those vital points, those weaknesses. That's clear, isn't it? So here, Geshe Rinpoche gives the example of 3 things. He says, don't try to highlight the defects of someone in public. One knows, okay, this is the moment to really embarrass that person. Don't try to bring to light. Don't put someone in a bad light. And don't use dirty means to hurt someone, like black magic or something else. Let's call them low blows. We need to have the dignity and the strength to face someone eye to eye, and not try to go behind his back or do use strange means. We should try to resolve the conflict and not to actually hurt that other person. Because very often, I just repeat one more time, our objective is not to resolve the conflict. With this negative mind, we don't want to resolve the conflict. We want to hurt that person. So if someone did something, and it can happen as well, if you have an issue with someone and that person, let's say this person does something aggressive or violent, I mean, that should not be repeated, of course. That should not be repeated. In my opinion, that person who did that act should be accompanied and helped so that we're sure that he doesn't do that again. It shouldn't be punished, just punished for punishment's sake. Sometimes punishment is necessary to help that person understand that act should not be repeated, because as human beings we do what we do on the basis of 2 things, 2 main things, 3 actually. 3 stimuli. I do something or I avoid something, or because there's some kind of reward, or because I want to avoid a punishment. I want to get a reward, avoid a punishment, or I have the moral, there's a moral question about it. So to avoid certain things to be repeated, we know that there are negative consequences, and so that keeps me from doing that thing. But it's something else. Oh, you did something bad, so now you need to suffer. Is this difference clear? So, in our small reality, we need to be careful to not enter in those same dynamics where we also rejoice for the suffering of someone that we think deserves to be punished somehow. So we should try to resolve conflicts and help within our capacity, help this person, but I don't oppose this person simply because I don't agree or whatever it is. There's not this concept of punishment. Okay? So for this, don't strike others at the vital points. Ideally, don't strike at all. And much less at their weaknesses. Number 14. This is nice too. Don't burden an ox with the load of a tso. Don't burden an ox with the load of a tso. The tso is an actual crossbreeding between a yak, the yak, and a cow. It's an animal that is very, very resistant, is able to carry a lot of weight. The tso is an animal that can carry a lot, so don't burden an ox with the load of a tso, because an ox doesn't have the same ability. What does that mean? Don't put your own responsibilities onto others. What a tso can handle, you give it to a tso. What an ox can handle, you give it to an ox. Don't put your own errors onto other people, your own responsibilities, and put your own defects onto others. And don't pass the buck. There's an attitude I think is healthy but very rare, being able to open without problem, open to admit openly our own weaknesses or mistakes, because sometimes things don't go well. But it's interesting that when things don't go well, who did it? No one. It's the story of the watermelon rind stuck in the toilet. I came back from a trip to Tibet once. I got home. I went to the bathroom and it was all blocked up. I called Vincenzo. He's not working anymore, but he lives here in Albagnano, near to Albagnano. So he came home and he saw that there were 2 or 3 pieces of watermelon rind, like in the actual tubing. And he looked at me and he said, "What did you do?" And I looked at him. I said, "No, me. I had just came back from my trip." And he said, "Oh, yeah, right." He said, "You have no idea. The things that I found in the toilet tubes. Even when someone lives alone, it was not their fault." I said, "Okay." I was curious. I went to the only person who was the only person that was manning the house. And you could see that the watermelon rind had been eaten recently. And I said, "Did you eat any watermelon recently? Do you know anything about watermelon?" "No, watermelon, no, nothing." "Well, the toilet was blocked from watermelon rind." I said, "Well, I don't know anything about that." I said, "Well, maybe they were spirits that were eating watermelon." or someone came during the night and put them in the toilet. But the lesson of this story for me is that we don't need to hide, because it's clear that we can do silly things. It happens. But when we admit them, we're creating the basis to learn something and to not repeat it. When we don't admit our errors, one, we're putting them onto someone else, and we're blocking this possibility of learning and of not repeating them. If I take the responsibility to do something, I'm not putting that responsibility onto someone else. If I'm not able to do it, I can look for someone else, but I don't throw it on to someone else if it's my responsibility. If I make any kind of mistake, I don't put that responsibility of that thing on someone else. I take the responsibility, and I try to fix it. In other words, if I block the toilet, at least I call the plumber myself, or I try to clean it myself, or help in some way. In general, this is something that's very important, because we can easily put the responsibility onto others, and to pretend that the errors are not your own, that someone else did them. But being able to really say, yes, that was me, I'm sorry, how can I better the situation, fix the situation? This is an image came to my mind. Sometimes I'm going to share it, otherwise it just stays stuck in my mind. A little bit like, excuse the image, but just imagine we're in a room, and then at a certain point there was a bad smell. It happened once. There was a master, Lati Rinpoche, who was giving teachings, and Geshe Rinpoche was present, many important lamas. I think Geshe Rinpoche had this small bulldog, and at a certain point, the bulldog started farting. But everyone, I mean, it was really stinky, and Lati Rinpoche started looking around, what is going on? And he looks around, and his attendant looked at and said that it was the dog, but the dog was Geshe Rinpoche's dog. And so at this point, Lati Rinpoche says, not only you fart, but you also blame it on the dog, and then it just made everybody laugh. Of course, the dog would have no problem admitting it. Sometimes it's not the fart; it's maybe a word that was said that didn't end up well, or something that you do that creates problems, and you realize that if you had done differently it would have been better. It happens. It's important for us to recognize, not with a feeling of guilt, but recognizing, okay, I did something stupid. Let me at least be part of the solution. And much less blame it on someone else. I made the mess. It's up to me to clean it up. It's not that I dirty things up and I leave it to someone else. I burden someone else with something that's my responsibility. So we don't pass the buck. We don't burden an ox with the load of a tso. I think this is quite clear. Don't abuse the practice. Number 15. Don't abuse the practice means don't use the practice of Lojong for mundane reasons. So it's not our problem, but it's very common in Tibet and India, and when they're monks, for example, to go and pray in people's homes or have pujas. And here Geshe Rinpoche says, don't use the practice of Lojong, where you recite the verses of Lojong, as a means to obtain offerings. Don't use the practice of Lojong to obtain something material. Don't use the practice of Lojong to nourish your image, your power for anything that is material. Don't explain Lojong with this attitude of nourishing one's ego, I'm the one who understands, etc. Don't use it for mundane reasons, economic reasons, reasons of power, image, etc. An example would be, I could at a certain point, I study well, there's something important for me, and then I use the text of Lojong, this knowledge, to do the super expensive courses. I'm abusing the practice. Is that clear? Or I explain the practice someone, I give them the text as a way to nourish an image, my ego, and even there I'm abusing the practice. So don't abuse the practice, don't use the practice for mundane questions. I think that's very linear, that's clear. So 16. So I read the wrong one in Tibetan. Let me go back. Don't sprint to win the race. Don't want to be the first one in line. Don't try to practice mind training with the attitude of wanting to be the first one to get out of samsara, the best of the students, the one who knows how to do better than everyone else. Don't be competitive in your spiritual practice. Oh, I'm able to maintain my vows instead. Them, oh, I don't criticize anymore, but look at them, how much they criticize. Don't compete. We're not here to compete. We're here to help each other, to walk together, not to see who is good and who is less good. I tell you that often those who don't seem to be very able are the most able. Actually, a few years ago in the south of India at the monastery of Serpom, there was an old monk, and his nickname was Dimakara, which means crazy in the Karnata Hindi language. I don't know. Anyway, it meant out of his mind. Why? Because he was nice, but he spent most of his life there. He wasn't the best student. He wasn't the one who did the best retreats, or let's say wasn't the example of the practitioner, good monk. He was there, nice, but he chatted. He was a little bit by himself, but he wasn't the poster child. And then one day he dies. He dies well and peacefully. And what happens is that he entered into a state of meditation during the death process because he could stay. His body didn't go into decay, and around his heart was warm. And this happens to many to good meditators, and it can happen for it lasts a couple hours. And he stayed like this for months, and everyone was deeply touched and shocked. They were saying, "Look, we never considered him much, and he shows us that he's the one who understood more than all of us put together." And my master, one of my master in India, again, Lakpala, he said that when he was in India as a child, the same thing happened. That all those who treated this monk like the monk gone wrong, one day he went to his student and he said, "For 3 days, don't disturb me. Don't bring me water, don't bring me food, because I'm going to die." And he thought it was a joke, but he went 3 days later and he found him seated in meditation dead. And in front of him there was everything necessary for to not give work to anyone else. There was actually a rope to tie up the body, and the tissue, the cloth to wrap up the body. One of the most difficult things is knowing when we're going to die and recognizing the moment of death and using that process of death for meditation. There was another monk at Tashilumpa, whose nickname was Shinshon Tampa, which is from the Lamrim part of the Guru Puja, because he had many disciples, and at a certain point he said, "Now I need to die. It's my moment." And he would gather up his disciples to meditate and die, and they would do a very slow recitation of Guru Puja so he could die in the right moment. And then they would get after the Kyoni Lama, Kyoni Yidam. He never, no, you guys recite quickly, and then they would do Shinsho Tampa, etc. quickly. So he tried a couple of times. And he didn't manage, and then they nicknamed him Shinsho Tampa to say that those instead, there are those instead who theoretically have all the knowledge but don't manage. And Kyabche Son Rinpoche, he knew to recognize the moment of his death. He went to say goodbye to his master. He recorded his testament, his will and testament. He called his closest disciples and gave instructions, and then he went to meditate and died. I mean, very few are able to do this. So Ken Lakpala, my master, said, "You never know who you have in front of you. Really, you never know who you have in front of you." So we don't need to compete to compete. Who's the best practitioner? Who's the worst practitioner? We don't know who's in front of us. And when we go into competition, when we compete with others, we go off of our path. So don't try. We're not here to compete. We're here to support each other. So don't sprint to win the race. Don't try to be the best in the class. Number 17. Don't turn gods into devils. The gods is something sacred, something virtuous, and the devils is the embodiment of something negative and bad. So the idea here, we're talking about the embodiment of something virtuous and sacred, and a demon would be then the embodiment of something negative, bad. So don't turn gods into devils, which means don't transform your spiritual practice of Lojong, of mind training, that has its objective to eliminate selfishness into something that actually cultivates your selfishness. Don't let that happen, because the danger is real. The danger is imminent. I perceived this once, and I apologize for my judgment. Um, um, this was my perception. I can only talk about, I don't mean to generalize. It was my perception. In 1995, Lama Ganchen was invited to a very important interreligious meeting, which was in Israel, Jubileum. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was present, and Lama Ganchen, he couldn't go, so I went to represent him. And what touched me negatively, the feeling that I had, was each one from each different religion was there with his robes and hats and entourage. Each one was the holder of truth, but they weren't able to set their hat down, sit at the table, and see what was in common. I mean, that was my sensation. I repeat, it's not something objective, it's absolutely subjective, but showed me this danger that exists, that when one follows a spiritual path, and there's a social aspect of that spiritual path, that in that social arena of power and social norms, and you can transform gods into devils, because that interacting on that level becomes more important than the essence. And I don't see it as a great problem for us, but let's be careful. Let's make sure that our spiritual practice in general and our Lojong practice, make sure that it goes against our selfishness as we grow in compassion and wisdom. Make sure that it doesn't instead nourish any kind of arrogant mind. So we have to make sure that we do not turn gods into devils. This is so important. Don't seek others' misery as a means to happiness. Don't seek others' suffering as a means to your happiness. Here, Trija Rinpoche makes reference to two attitudes. One is not wanting others' suffering, because when I desire someone else's suffering, it means that I want that person to suffer. So I try to reach a state of well-being through the misery of someone else, through the suffering of someone else. Oh, well, for example, you deserve that, or yeah, you did right. This feeling of vendetta, or wanting to hurt someone, maybe not even hurting them, but you want them to experience some kind of suffering, given that that person perhaps made you suffering. So I see the suffering of someone else as a means to my own happiness. Can we recognize this? We're not talking about torturing someone and feeling pleasure from that. we're talking about simply, we're talking about something subtle, but not even that subtle. That desiring just wanting something bad to happen to someone else. I want this to go badly for you. When there's a conflict, very often it happens that there's the desire for the suffering of others. That's clear, isn't it? When we feel that we have been wronged, very often the selfish attitude at that point is that we want the other to experience that same negativity, that same wrong, as if that would resolve anything. It's crazy. I mean, it's really crazy. It's like this feeling of vendetta. If I suffered a lot for something that happened, to go and make sure that that person, that one who wronged me, to make sure that that person, if we make sure that that person also experiences something negative, this person who I think wronged me, is that going to take away my suffering? Absolutely not. So do not desire other people's suffering. Don't try to seek others' suffering as a means to your own happiness. And the other aspect of this commitment is on a more practical level, not only mental level. Don't do things that, to get to something, that an object, to reach an object of your desire. Don't put people in situations where they suffer. I mean, these are situations of abuse, or so that I get what I want. This other person needs to live an experience of suffering. Let me try to find some example. I sell drugs, for example. I don't want you to hurt yourself. What I want is to earn easy money. What's wrong with earning a couple bucks? In and of itself, nothing. The legal aspects aside, but the problem is if I earn based on something that is harmful to something else, I am basing my happiness on someone else's suffering. And this happens very often in situations of abuse, or stronger governments and weaker governments, where situations are upheld, situations of poverty and precarious situations, because that enables the other to maintain their high position and powerful, rich position. This should be absolutely avoided. What happens is this: we live in a reality where there's a very complex interdependence. Actually, unfortunately, it's difficult. I mean, that we can do something that is totally free from damaging, from harming someone. One might say, I'm a vegan. I eat rice. The rice, for example, is one of the crops that creates the greatest number of deaths for the insects, because what happens when you grow rice, you fill up the ground with water, and then when you cultivate, when you harvest the rice, you kill all of those insects that were living in that paddy, in the rice paddy. Same thing for cotton. So to be able to harvest cotton, from what I've understood, you need to keep the insects. You need to keep the insects away because the insects loves cotton. So you need to use a tremendous amount of pesticide. That is incredibly harmful, killing the insects and hurting the environment. Look at the Jainists, for example, who don't want to. I don't know if you've ever seen them. The more serious practitioners, they have this concept of non-attachment. So they have a gauze mask to not inhale, to not disturb bugs. Also, the water has to have like a filter on top so that no bugs get inside. And then they walk with a very light broom, so that they make sure that they don't walk on any insects. And I think they only eat fruit that falls from trees. I mean, how many of us would be able to live like that? I think they also walk around naked. What happens that in our interdependence, inevitably, we will do things that within this complex interdependence that creates, there are those who suffer in the middle of this interdependence. There's a difference between doing an action that indirectly involves someone that then suffers, compared to doing something with awareness, where we generate a state of suffering to someone to reach my state of pleasure. And then there's situations that are very borderline, and each one needs to observe himself, and all. Even there are those who say, the less I know, the better off I am. But actually, at the end of the day, it's the opposite. So it's important, for example, the example you gave of the cell phone. For me, it's a fundamental point, is one of the problems that we have on this planet today is this unleashed consumption. Because when I throw something away, it just doesn't end there. Or when I buy something, it's not just an exchange of money for product. There is a much greater cost. And one of the problems, or the greatest problems we have today, is that we live in a part of the world where we consume resources, more resources than the planet is able to sustain. And this is clear, isn't it? So what should we do? What can we do? At least try to consume with awareness, as aware as possible. So I buy what I need and not what I want. I try to instead of recycling, let's try to upcycle. Give meaning to what I have. Try to interact in a material way with our exchanges of consumption with awareness, and not with an attitude of not caring along this chain of decomposition. And for example, or in the chain in the economy. And I know it's not the time, and I don't know if I should do it, to open up this window. I'm not going to go into the topic of whether we should eat or not eat meat. But I just want to say that there are different ways to eat meat. And let's not get into the to this discussion. We could spend hours on it, but the fact is, when I eat that food, beyond my meal, my plate of food, is there suffering or not? And with this specific point, when we talk about eating meat, it's not about the killing of the animal, but it's the way it was raised, the way the livestock is kept and raised. This is the biggest problem, I think. So, and I leave this to everyone's correct discernment, because one thing is a question of health. I need to eat a meat with a certain awareness. Something else is, oh, okay, well, I can buy what I want. I like the taste. It's a totally different way. So let's be careful with our interactions to not do things that my pleasure depends on the suffering of others. Is that clear? And this means making choices, making changes, buying different kinds of products, avoiding things that we like but that damage the environment or are based on some kind of abuse. It means also this last commitment has to also deal with a healthy and aware consumption of things. But not only, also with our relationships in our small world. We need, in a small way, avoid abuse. Don't let someone be in a situation of malaise because it's comfortable for me. This all falls into this last commitment. I think it's quite clear, and I leave you all the space to think about it, reflect upon it. So let's just quickly don't go against the mind training you promised to observe. Don't be reckless in your practice. Don't be partial. Always train in the three general points. Transform your attitude, but maintain your natural behavior. Don't speak of others' incomplete qualities. Don't concern yourself with others' business. Train to counter whichever disturbing emotion is greatest. Give up every hope of reward. Avoid poisonous food. Don't maintain misplaced loyalty. Don't make sarcastic remarks. Don't lie in ambush. Don't strike at the vital point. Don't burden an ox with the load of a tzu. Don't abuse the practice. Don't sprint to win the race. Don't turn gods into devils. And don't seek others' misery as a means to happiness. It's very clear, isn't it? And these are the white lines on the road, the markers, so that we can protect ourselves and stay on the path.
Drame cheki pela long che ching sada lamge yunde rabzone dorje change kopa nyur tob sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan dele kshin nin Tsen takto delek pe kuncho sumki chingi lop kuncho sumki ngodrubot sol kuncho sumki trashishu.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle all the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Oma hun temba lame sangye rinpoche, kyoba lame tamche rinpoche, drimba lame gendu rinpoche, kyamne kuncho sumla chopa. Buon appetito.
Have a good lunch. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.